Our presenter tonight is Dr. Lee Jones, a veterinarian at the Tifton University of Georgia Veterinary Diagnostics Lab, and he's going to talk to us about heifer development, specifically looking at the health aspects.
Thanks. So, as Dr. Whitley mentioned, I'm going to focus primarily on health, but I'm also going to give a bit of an overview of what this series is supposed to accomplish. And I hope that by the end of the series, you'll look at your heifers as an investment. And there's two groups of cattle that you bring on your place or you raise from your own herd that's going to really determine where you're going to be 5 to 10 years from now. And that's the replacement heifers and then your bulls. Now, I'm not going to get into the genomic selection. I think Dr. Noble and Jason Duggan with the University of Georgia are going to talk a little bit about some of the selection and some of the options you have there for phenotypic selection and some genetic considerations. But I really want you to think about your heifers as your future capability. What can I do to make sure that I am positioning my heifers to pay me back dividends? We'd like to see them stay in our herd 8 or 10 years because longevity matters. So what can I do to set my heifers up for success? If I set my heifers up for success, we should be setting ourselves up for success as well as just to be honest, with the joy of having very productive, healthy cattle. So one of the questions is how many do I need? And then, what do I need? Do I need to select heifers from my own herd, or do I need to buy heifers? And that's going to be both an economics decision as well as a genetics decision. Am I just going to rely on genetic progress with my bulls, my sires that I choose, or do I want to bring in additions to my herd and bring in some other genetics? Somebody talked about some Aberdeen Angus. You may want a herd with a particular frame size. You need to select a herd that's going to fit your needs and your goals. And then how am I going to do that? Am I going to have facilities? If I'm keeping heifers, I'm just going to have some dedicated facilities. Do I have pens and pastures that I can keep? Am I going to buy a bull just for 10 heifers? That's a very expensive, but can I use my bulls on my cow herd with my heifers? So, some decisions there. What's my budget for my bull? Am I going to do AI? AI is a great option for heifers, and hopefully Dr. Pedro Fontes with the University of Georgia will get into how to have a successful AI program. Well, he will. That's why he was chosen to be on the program. And so what is my budget there for developing my heifers, and what's going to cost to develop my heifers? Can I provide the aftercare needed for success? Am I going to be able to manage those heifers appropriately? Or are they going to have to go in with the big cows and fend for themselves? This is going to put them at a disadvantage. Am I going to be able to feed them appropriate after breeding through calving? We know that the group first calf heifers we have the highest attrition rate in first calf heifers, just simply because their nutritional needs are so much higher. And Dr. Stewart will go into that. And are there other options for replacements? And I want to be cautious here because purchasing adult cattle and bringing them in need to have a very good biosecurity plan. But sometimes a droughted neighbor or something may say, hey, I've had enough. I've got some good cows and they're on a good health plan, and, they've been kept in a closed system. So those may be, a good option to purchase if I'm looking at herd expansion. What are the important traits for a beef cow-calf farm? Basically, we need that cow to get pregnant every 12 months and wean a healthy calf. So the replacement criteria, I want them to, if they're going to be replacements, I want them to calve as a 2-year-old. I want a high pregnancy rate. I want them to calve unassisted with a vigorous calf. I want that heifer to produce quality colostrum. That's one of the things that heifers are a little bit of a disadvantage compared to a cow that's had a couple of years experience, and then they need to rebreed. As I mentioned before, that these heifers are the ones, first calf heifers are the ones that have the highest attrition rate, and they're really not, if they don't get pregnant that third year, or bring that calf that third year, then we really can't call them a replacement. And so at what age does she actually start paying me back? In other words, she is producing, and then the economics of that, she started paying me back versus all the expenses up front. Anybody, this is our cow job description. So heifers need to fit into this program. They need to get pregnant, calve unassisted, deliver a healthy calf, wean a healthy calf, preferably 50% or more of their body weight. And they need to repeat this every year, every 12 months. They have expenses every 12 months. They need to do this with very little assistance, provided that I'm providing them adequate resources, and do it economically and efficiently. I know that's a little bit of a repeat, but I really can't overemphasize this job description of our cow herd, because they're out there doing a job. So how many heifers do I need? And that's going to depend on, what are my goals in my herd? Am I going to cull some cows this year? Have I had any death loss in my herd? What are my resources? Do I have, am I optimizing my stocking rate? Do I want to expand? People might not be thinking about expansion right now with the drought. I know our national cow herd is dropping, so there may be some opportunity in the next 2 to 3 years to sell some high quality replacement heifers. But what are my resources? Do I have room to expand? Do I need to contract? What about, maybe I need to talk with my accountant, because there are some accounting decisions, financial decisions that need to be made as far as, am I going to keep heifers? Am I going to buy heifers? What am I going to do there? Maybe I can't afford to keep heifers because I need to sell off the heifers to, pay down some debt or pay for some feed or something like that. So those are just decisions that I need to look at as far as how many heifers I want to keep or purchase. And most herds plan for about 15 to 20% replacements. I may want to keep a few extra ones, because not all the replacement heifers are going to get pregnant. I may keep 20, but I can almost guarantee you that all 20 will not get bred in a 60 to 75 day season. There are going to be some that are going to get culled out of there. Some might have injuries. But if I do have a few extra heifers, then I might be able to have an additional market for bred heifers. So when I'm selecting heifers from my own herd, I might want to go ahead and look at heifers doing selection from proven mothers. Again, I'm not going to get into great detail. This is something Dr. Noble and Jason Duggan are going to cover, but I just want to at least cover some of the bases initially, especially for folks who may not be able to attend all of the sessions. Looking at their body weight at weaning, if it's important to understand that heifer's going to probably start cycling when she's about 60% of her mature body weight. So if my cow herd is average 1,200 pound cow, then that heifer is probably going to start cycling between 720 to between 7 and 750 pounds body weight. So if I wean a heifer off and she's only 400 pounds, that means that she's got to gain 300 to 350 pounds before she's going to actually start reach puberty, start getting reproductive maturity, and then go ahead and get bred. So a very, very lightweight heifer may not actually reach puberty and be breedable at the beginning of the breeding season. If she ends up late, then she's going to stay late, or she may end up being open a year later, and all of those development costs are for naught, are wasted. On the flip side, though, if I'm only selecting the oldest and the biggest, this has the potential to increase my frame size in my cow herd. And we can get very, very heavy cows, very, very high frame size cows that are just inefficient. So I really need to find out what kind is that nice average size that would work and be an efficient cow. Remove potential problems. Are there heifers that have physical blemishes? Maybe they have some conformation issues. ones that are infertile. As Handy and I talked about palpating heifers, sometimes we can identify some of those heifers. I'll talk about where that fits into the schedule. Temperament, bad decisions can last a lifetime or a long time. It seems like a lifetime, but poor tempered cows just end up tearing up equipment. They lead other cows astray, and there's really just no reason to keep them around unless you just enjoy the excitement. But most of us are looking for a productive cow herd, and cows with bad attitude and bad temperament, just uncooperative personality, probably would be better just to send them on down the road. I tell people all the time, we decide as far as whether or not heifers are going to be breeders or feeders. So we can send some of these animals on down the road and they can be feeders. And then the genomics tools, I'll talk very briefly about that, but that's going to be for another session. The genomics tools that we have available today, this is really good because it can help me identify the quality heifers that I want to keep, as well as potentially identify some problem heifers. Some of the maternal traits you can see here in this box. We're looking at birth weight, weaning weight, some docility, fertility, the scrotal circumference, and the reason that that's still applicable to heifers is that bulls that have high scrotal circumference their daughters are going to reach puberty earlier. The earlier they reach puberty, the sooner that they're going to breed, and they're going to be able to reach that first calf at 24 months of age. So these are traits that we can identify without actually measuring physical traits, and physical traits just take time. And so this gives us a little bit of a picture of how that heifer is going to perform over her life, but understanding, of course, that genetics, having great genetics without having the tools, the resources that management provides, they're not going to reach their genetic potential unless I provide the resources. So this is a study we did at the University of Georgia, and we just looked at the Neogen identity beef, and this has been replaced by the other tests that in the previous slide. But what we did is we looked at some Brangus heifers, and we broke them down. There were 27. We broke them down, and what we did was they broke down in just quarters. So there was what we call the highest quarter, the next to the highest quartile, then the next to the lowest, and then the lowest. And what we found when we did the model for income based on when that calf was born is that the heifers that ranked the highest, we saw about a $50 profit that year. And this was a bad year for calf prices, so would probably be better this year. But that year the calf prices were very low. The heifers in the second quartile barely broke even. But the heifers that were in the bottom half, we lost money beginning on year one. So in this group of heifers, if I had done the study or if I had done the testing and that I'd only kept the top 25%, I would have made a little bit of money, but I would have saved a lot of money by getting rid of the heifers that ranked at the bottom. So fertility is job one for these heifers. We need to palpate, weigh, measure heifers early enough to make changes. As I mentioned before, we want them to reach 60% mature body weight. And if we're going to palpate, we want to find the immature free martin. So a free martin is basically a heifer born to a twin. And a lot of times she's missing part of her reproductive tract. She may not even be cycle. A lot of times these heifers are some of the prettier heifers, but they're not going to be very fertile. Only about 1 out of every 20 or 30 of these heifers are actually fertile. Or sometimes heifers get pregnant, especially if I wean very late. Sometimes those heifers actually get bred by the pasture bull. So if I leave the bull out too long, or if I wean really late, some of these heifers can actually get bred by the bull. Most heifers reach puberty in between 720 to 750, especially when we're talking about Angus or Hereford cross, if we're looking at a 1,200-pound mature cow. So I want to palpate that heifer and check their reproductive tract again to see if there's any problems. That's also a good time to implement the vaccination. I will go over an example health program here in a few slides, But I definitely want to make sure that I've given all my modified lives before 30 days before breeding. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then again, the nutrition program needs to be adequate, and it needs to contain a really good mineral product. Pelvimetry. Pelvimetry is just simply measuring the width and the height of the birth canal. Is that necessary? There are programs that do this, and they will guarantee, well, not necessarily guarantee is probably the wrong word, but they will give some assurance that the heifers will be able to calve without any problems. Heifers with a small pelvis area relative to the size of the calf have increased calving problems. This is why sire selection, and I think Dr. Noble will go over this, why sire selection is so important as we're looking at, we want the bulls with a high calving ease direct and low birth weight. Calving ease direct measures other factors other than just simply birth weight on calving ease. Overall, the predictive value of pelvimetry is not that great because calving ease is a multifactorial event. We do know, though, that heifers with a very narrow birth canal, less than 20 centimeters squared, that's like if it was 10 centimeters, 12 centimeters high and 10 centimeters wide, that is very likely to lead to calving problems. So this can also be done at the same time that heifers are palpated ahead of time to see if there's any problems. What kind of percentages? Maybe 1 out of every 10 or 12 heifers might actually have some problem that we need to palpate and identify and get them out of the program. But it's fairly low number, so don't want to leave the impression that 50% or 25%, but usually less than 10%, 6 to 8% of the heifers have an issue that can be identified pre-breeding. So now we'll get into the health program. So I heard a question. I'm not sure. Somebody might ask a question about, heifers. I would not expose heifers before 13 months of age, personally, because if a heifer gets bred too young, okay, it could mess her up for lifetime fertility. So I would wait until the heifer's, at least 13 months of age, because if she breeds, early at 13 months of age, she's going to calve about 22 months of age, and she's still got to grow. And so that heifer is doing a lot. Unless you have a really high feeding program, then most heifers on a forage-based system, ideally, you don't really want to expose them before 13 months of age. They have to breed at 15 months of age to go ahead and calve as a 2-year-old. So if I can have a heifer calving between 22 to 24, 5, 6 months in her first year, much after that, she gets late to stay with the herd program, your herd. And then if she calves much earlier, she's not going to be quite as mature. She's not going to be as developed. You're likely to have more calving problems, some other issues related to calving. And so it would be better ideally for that heifer to calve first between 23, 24, 25 months of age. So let's get into the heifer program, the health program and vaccination program, which I know there's a lot of questions about this. So we want at least 2 doses of a modified live. And I'm going to go into what a modified live is. I'm going to show you some pictures of some vaccines. There's an awful lot of questions people have. When I'm talking about a modified live MLV, I'm talking about modified live virus. I'm really not talking about a modified live bacteria or modified live blackleg, anything like that. It's a modified live virus vaccine. And the 2 viruses that we care the most about in reproduction are bovine viral diarrhea virus and infectious bovine rhinotracheitis. It's also known as bovine herpes virus 1, or some of the old timers call it red nose. Then we do want to add a clostridial vaccine. Okay, this is commonly called blackleg. 2 or 3, and by the time that they're weaned, should provide lifetime protection. In other words, I don't typically, as a veterinarian working with my clients, I don't recommend that we give a 7-way Clostridium to all the cows every year. Once they've had 2 or 3 in that first year of life, we typically have a lifetime production. Sometimes I add it to booster that colostrum. As Dr. Whitley pointed out, colostrum is the cow's first milk, and it's very important for calves to get that because that contributes to their immune system. I definitely want to deworm, and that's a combination of an injectable and an oral. You will not see me ever recommend a pour-on dewormer. I do use pour-ons for fly control, but I will never recommend using a pour-on product to deworm my cows. It is the efficacy, the effectiveness of pour-on dewormers is very low.
And Dr. Jones, some people are still using the deworming blocks, and I don't think we recommend those either, right?
No, we don't. And the reason for that's a good point, Dr. Whitley. The reason we don't is that the cows have to eat a certain dose. And a cow might be well on her way of consuming her dose of dewormer in that block, and another cow come up and hit her. And so it interrupted. So sometimes what we have, I heard a nutritionist mention something to me in a group the other day. He said 50% or 25% of the cows consume 50% of the mineral or block or anything like that, leaving the rest of them not getting their full dose. So a deworming block would work perfect if you knew everybody was getting the exact dose, but they don't. And what happens is that the low dose, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And what happens is that we get some genetic resistance in our parasites, internal parasites, when we don't use an adequate dose to go ahead and cause the death of those parasites. So we definitely want to do a pre-breeding program, deworming program, and then as before calving, we probably also want to repeat that. And that really depends on my stocking rate and some other factors. But this is just a kind of example rule of thumb. And then the calf vaccination program, that's if the calves have been vaccinated on while they're nursing mother, then that's going to transition over into the replacement heifer program. So all of those calf vaccines, some people don't vaccinate calves until they're weaning. So if that's the case, then we're going to start with an aggressive vaccination program. And I'll go into that, an example of one of those vaccine models. So the IBR and the BVD protection becomes the fertility and the fetal protection. So IBR and BVD are also important in calf pneumonia, but they're also very, very important in protecting fertility and protecting the fetus. So after the weaning, that might be the best time to implement a heifer development vaccination plan. They may not have been vaccinated when they're nursing their mama. That's because I'm limited in the vaccines that I can use in my calves. Some modified lives are not, they're not recommended for use in cows that have never been vaccinated with that modified live for fear of possible shedding of the virus. So sometimes calves have only gotten a killed virus while on the cows. When they've been weaned, then I can start the modified live virus vaccination program. For sure, 2 rounds of that's supposed to be MLV, not MKV. For sure, 2 rounds of the modified live is good, but a third one is better. With that last dose given at least 30 days before breeding, 45 days before breeding is actually better, because the modified live can have an impact on fertility. So I don't want to give it too close to breeding, or it might delay my breeding, and that's not something we want to do. The vaccination should include bovine viral diarrhea virus, IVR or bovine herpes virus 1, plus Vibrio and lepto. The lepto is typically a 5-way. And then once those heifers are pregnant, then I'm going to transition over to a killed virus vaccine. And I won't go into why that's important, but it's really important to use both types of vaccine in my cow herd because it gives us the best stimulation, overall stimulation of our immunity, and we're looking for that immune system to protect our fertility in our cow herd as well as protect those calves. So when I talk about a modified live, and just because I have these up here on the screen doesn't mean that I necessarily recommend these vaccines. Now, there's a couple here that I do use, but this is the Zoetis product, and you can see it's called Bovishield Gold. FP stands for Fetal Protection 5, and that's got that bovine rhinotracheitis and viral diarrhea virus. It's also got parainfluenza and respiratory syncytial, but I'm mostly concerned about the BVD and the IBR. And then it's got the V for the Vibrio, and then 5 strains of Lepto. This one also, Pyramid 10, it has Lepto. It doesn't have the Vibrio, but it does have the rhinotracheitis and the viral diarrhea virus. This one's kind of the same thing. So all of these, you can see they come in 2 bottles. The bottles have to be mixed together to administer. And you give these, if you've attended our BQA sessions, you know that we recommend giving this entire contents in less than an hour. So there's 10 dose bottle here. That's usually fairly easy to accomplish. But these products express, this also is an FPVL5. This is Boehringer Ingelheim. This is also Boehringer Ingelheim. So they have 2 different reproductive vaccines here. This is, AgriLab, so they have a product with titanium 5, and it doesn't have Vibrio, and then Merck also has one as well. So you can see that these 5 are an example of a modified live. When I'm talking about the killed, okay, something like Triangle. So killed doesn't require any mixing whatsoever. If I buy a bottle of Triangle 10, I don't have to mix it. I can just give it, and I have a little bit more leeway on time here. The same with ViraShield. This is ViraShield by Elanco, and it's the same type of product. These 2 products do require mixing, but they're treated kind of like a killed vaccine. They're actually considered a combo because the bovine rhinotracheitis, that strain of virus doesn't replicate like the modified live does. It's a different strain of the IBR, and it's safer to give to pregnant cows. Elanco also has a product a lot like Cattle Master. It's kind of the same principle. Elanco has both these 2 products, and this is Triangle. This is a Zoetis product. So a lot of people like the name Cattle Master, and so they'll give it. So this is just an example of a heifer health and breeding plan. Let's say I'm weaning at 7 to 9 months of age, and then I wean them and I give them a modified live vaccine and maybe a blackleg, a 7-way blackleg. I didn't show an example, but something like this might be like Vision 7 or Ultravac or Barvac. And there might be additional vaccines that my veterinarian might recommend. And then I definitely want to go ahead and deworm with the combo approach. I want to make sure that they're appropriately tagged with a permanent ID. Do I want to tattoo them or provide some little small tag so that they can't lose that ear tag? That's always a good idea because those dangle tags, while they're very, very helpful, they can sometimes be lost. And so about another month later, I want to come back with that 2nd dose of the modified live, and maybe a 2nd dose of blackleg. If they haven't had 2 doses of that yet, I want to come back with the blackleg booster. And maybe at this point, I had an opportunity to spend some time with my heifers. I've watched their disposition. I've watched how they, how we've interacted, and that. So I might start putting a quick list of possible keepers. And then I come back here another 2 to 4 months later, and I might come back with an additional modified live. I think 3 modified lives pre-breeding is probably the optimal situation that I would consider. Notice I'm not recommending a second dose of 7-way. If I've gotten 2 of them in 30 days, then I should have really good protection there, and I probably don't need to do that again. Do I need to deworm again? It really depends on how my heifers are fleshing out. Are they starting to kind of bloom and they're on my feed program, or they're on some really good grazing? How do they look? If they're really rough hair coated, I might want to take some fecal samples and just see, is this time to go ahead and set up my sink and AI? Do I need to go ahead and palpate ahead of time and make sure that all my heifers are, everything is there and everything is functional? So I've already got that plan in place. And then at 14 to 15 months of age, I want to go ahead and expose the bull, either AI and then turn the bull out a week later. I want to make sure my bulls have passed a breeding soundness evaluation. That's not something I want to leave to chance, because there are about 1 out of every 8 or 10 bulls is what we call subfertile. I know we were talking about a subfertile heifer. A subfertile heifer, if she's subfertile, that's her own problem. But if a bull's subfertile, and he creates a problem for the whole herd. So I want to make sure that these bulls pass a breeding soundness evaluation at least 30 to 45 days before turning out. But I want to go ahead and expose them for maybe a 45 to 60 day breeding season, and then come back about 4 or 5 months later, preg check with ultrasound, because I can get down, to about 35 days after breeding with an ultrasound. And then I might go ahead and want to vaccinate my pregnant cows with a kill product. And then I want to go ahead and sell those opens. Go ahead and get those off the place, get them off the feed bill, and send them down the road. So, if there's any questions, I don't see anything in the chat box, but this is just kind of an example that I might look at as far as an overall health plan and breeding program. Dr. Fontes is going to talk a little bit about the breeding and estrus synchronization in AI, and I think since we've had our little interruption, we'll probably and just remember that at heifers that calve early, they wean heavier calves throughout their lifetime. This is some study done in Nebraska, and those heifers that calved at the very beginning of the season, because their calves are older, they actually wean, because they calved at the very beginning of the season. They stayed at the beginning of the season. You can see the black bar here versus the white bar. You can see that these heifers had more lifetime productivity. And that's very important to go ahead and get those heifers set up for success. Longevity, heifers that calve early stay in the herd longer. And it's very disappointing to have a heifer that calves late as a 2-year-old and then doesn't breed back, because I've got all those expenses in keeping her. And remember, if that heifer, she's 30 to 36 months old before I have anything to sell from her. And so that heifer, she doesn't need to be too late, or she's going to be very, very expensive. As far as maintaining the cow herd, body condition is very, very important on that heifer. Once she calves, then I want her to stay in my cow herd. So one last thing before I leave this. And so when we're weaning, I want you to think of weaning as an opportunity. So some farmers just separate the calves and they have very little interaction other than going out there and throwing them some hay, putting some feed in the bunk, and they don't have a ton of interaction. Weaning is really an opportunity to build trust in my future cow herd. And I really mean that. I want to build trust with my cows. I want my cows to trust me. If I want to work them, I want their cooperation. And the best way to get that is to help them see me as a good guy, somebody that's taken care of. I want them to see me as their shepherd, and they know that I'm caring for their needs. I'm providing for them. I'm feeding them. If I've got calves, my wife and I, we like to wean on a 3-day weekend. I know you're probably thinking, dude, you need a vacation. But no, I take a 3-day weekend. and we wean, and I go out there the very next morning and I've got a bucket of feed, and those calves are fussing, they're bawling for mama. I go in there and I get their attention, and I piddle around out there, and they're looking at me, and I sprinkle that feed, and I make a little bit of noise so that it gets their curiosity. And I sprinkle some feed in the trough, and you get one or two that's pretty curious. They'll come over to you, and that's a great way to select replacements. Those heifers that are moving towards you, because now I'm taking the role of caregiver to these animals. And so if they're moving toward me, they're showing some trust. These are the cattle that are going to be easy to get along with. The ones that are hard to wean can sometimes have a little bit of disposition. It's not always the case, but sometimes part of the case. So if I'm going out there, I'm feeding the calves, I'm giving some hay. And like I said, it's a 3-day weekend. I make weaning for those first 3 days a priority. So I interact with those calves. I can interrupt their fussing and their complaining. I can throw some hay in the bunk. I can throw some feed in the bunk, and I feed 2, maybe even 3 times a day. And so I'm interacting with those calves. And by the third day, they see me coming. They see me coming with that bucket. And any of you know, having cattle that are bucket broke is a great tool, because you can gather them out of pasture, but I'm training them at this point in time. So I encourage you to think about weaning as a great opportunity for training. You might even open up your alleyway and your gates and just let them walk through the chute after a few days, and train them to walk through a chute. No needles, no nothing. Just train them to walk through there. So it builds trust in those animals. It helps reduce the fear, makes my livestock more cooperative with me, and it's definitely a stress reliever for those cattle. So I encourage you to look at weaning as an opportunity to build trust and to build that shepherd relationship with your animals. So just, I guess, in summary, heifer selection, we're wanting to select those heifers and build that future. We want the best heifers for longevity and production. Are they going to be able to reach puberty and breed early? Because we know those heifers are going to be the most productive over their lifetime. Do they have the disposition or temperament that I want? Genomic tools are very helpful. As one cattleman said, and he was already in his 60s. He says, if I wanted to start all over again right now, I could build, using genomics tools, I could build a really good herd within my lifetime. And, using the old phenotypic, the physical attributes, it took years to do some selecting. And so now we can use some genomic tools and shorten that selection period. Would I be better off economically buying replacements? Hopefully we're going to have an economist talk about some of the different considerations on replacement sourcing. And then I definitely want to work with my veterinarian, work with someone and develop and implement a solid herd health program. Good vaccination program, good nutrition program, good mineral program, and then that's going to help as far as overall longevity and productivity. Development pays back. This was still got this cow in the herd. She's pushing 10 years old. This was her very first calf as a heifer. But if I hadn't have developed very, very, very well, then this calf would be missing. I tell people all the time, if you have 2 heifers and they first calve at 60 days apart, and they stay the 60 days apart, that one heifer that calved early, over her lifetime, she's going to produce 1,200 pounds more calf. And it's going to be at the same expenses every year as both of those, but we know that one of these is going to be more productive, and one of them is going to be a lot more fun and pay me back a lot sooner. So sire selection is also critical, and I know Dr. Noble is going to visit about that. But sire selection can influence my herd for a couple of decades, both in his daughters and in their daughters. So. But with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Dr. Jones, I have a question. What is the minimum age for the reproduction tract exam and the pelvic exam? What is the minimum age that heifer needs to be?
So I would recommend no younger than 12 months. We want most of those heifers to be at puberty. And so when we do a reproductive, and I really should have gone more into that, but when we're looking at, and I'll be glad to share a paper with Stefan and Nikki to disseminate with the group or you. But what we're looking at is there's 3 categories. There's the ready. Those are the ones that have already reached sexual maturity. The ones that are intermediate, and then the ones that are need some help, or maybe let's go ahead and just call them a call. And we'll just change them over from the breeding plan to the feeding plan. And so what we do is I basically palpate the tract. We look at the ovaries, we look at the reproductive tract, and just see, is it mature enough? Typically, in a fairly decent managed program, those heifers are going to reach puberty by the time they're 12 months old, maybe as late as 13 months old in an Angus. Now, if I'm dealing with Brahman cattle, Limousin cattle, a later maturing breed, then they're not going to reach maturity until 15, 16, 18 months of age. But typically 12 months of age is what we tend to focus on. If I get into a bunch of heifers and I find a lot of them are immature and they're lower body weight, then I know that I need to change my feeding program and increase feed and increase the nutrition and then reassess, because especially if I want to implement a synchronization and an AI, I want to set those heifers up for success, because that can be an expensive wreck if I spend a bunch of money on trying to get that done and I don't get very many heifers bred.
I got a question.
Yes.
How long would I should keep a bull with a herd of 10 cows? You know, how long would I use it? But 2 years, 3 years before I trade that bull out?
It depends on if you're keeping heifers or not. And it depends on what you do with those heifers. So if you're keeping the bull, let's just say you're selecting heifers out of that and you're taking the heifers to another place and you're breeding them at another place, and then you're bringing them back. Those heifers are going to be, 2 years old by the time that they would be potentially exposed to their dad. And so, you could keep that bull around. He could breed the cows 1 year. You could wean the heifers. He could breed the cows the next year. And then he could breed the cows actually the 3rd year, I think, if my math is right. So it'd be the 4th year that you would have risk of inbreeding. And unless you just had a straight terminal program. If you had a straight terminal program and all the heifers left the farm, then you can keep him out there as long as he's fertile, looking at a 60, 75 day breeding season as a rule. But most people, if they're keeping replacements, they're going to have to get rid of the bull every 3 years. Now, in that situation, if you're looking at this co-op here, and you've got a good bull, and your neighbor has a good herd health program like you do in a controlled season, you may even try to work together to keep bulls or something. You might be able to swap bulls. So there's other ways to help reduce your bull costs, and bull costs are very expensive, but they're a necessary expense.
Okay, thanks.
Dr. Jones, just in case we don't get our economist on board, are there any hints or any research you've seen about the economics of heifer development, keeping heifers versus buying heifers? I know you mentioned that it might be faster to make genetic progress in some cases by buying heifers, like sell some of yours and buy some that fit if you're trying to totally remake your herd or make really fast genetic progress and changing your herd, sell and maybe buy heifers. Are any hints that you could give us?
Well, I had an interesting couple of years ago. We had our calf crop, and the accountant says, "Well, which calves were which calves were from home raised cows, and which calves were from cows you bought?" And they actually was a different tax. He taxed them different. One was at capital gains, and one was at regular income. And then if you buy heifers, you actually can depreciate those out, just like if you bought equipment. And so there are some considerations there that many of us as just regular farmers, just might not think about. And so that's something to talk with our accountant about. As far as trying to figure out should I buy or should I raise? The other thing, of course, is your income. Just think about that, because a heifer, you're going to have, if you raise heifers and you actually pay attention, you're going to have between $1,200 and $1,500 invested in that heifer, especially if you buy one bull to breed 10 heifers. You're going to have a lot of money invested in those heifers already. You might be able to, instead of raising those heifers, you might actually be able to just go purchase those heifers for a lot less headache and same kind of money. So it's like everything, every decision we need to use a sharp pencil. And by that, I mean, we need to write everything down, consider the pros and cons, cost benefit, and decide, because most people think about just keeping heifers as the cheapest, and it's not always the case, especially if you can't feed a heifer so that she can go ahead and get pregnant early. Because if most of your heifers don't calve until they're 30 months of age, then those heifers are some of the most expensive animals you're going to raise. Dr. Noble, what's your thoughts?
I agree with you 100%. Those are issues you got to be careful with. This sometimes they breeds. Some of the larger breeds take a little bit longer time. Can't breed them as quick. Smaller statute cattle may cycle quicker. Some of the old style breeds may see some things like that. So these are general rules of thumbs. Each person got to look at their own cows. But when you got a small herd, you're probably not going to turn over that bull as much, which probably limits how often you select your heifers. It may require that you pick your heifers in the later years if you're going to keep him. But I'm going to keep him 3 or 4 years. I may not only keep his heifers this last year, so I can continue to use him and not worry about the inbreeding part.
Yep.
And inbreeding is an issue, but I've had situations where my bull got too big for the heifers to physically be able to support him. So it's not just how big his calf is sometimes when breeding, but you may have to replace a bull that physically is too big to actually mate those heifers.
Yeah, that's a fact, because he can't injure them. All right. Well, I appreciate that, and hopefully folks learned something. Don't know if you see the recording, there is my email was in and office number is in my very first slide. So if you got any questions, feel free to get in touch with Dr. Whitley or Stefan or Handy or Dr. Noble, and they can pass that information on to me.
Real good.
Right. Thank you so much for coming, everybody. And thank you, Dr. Jones, for a good presentation again.
Appreciate that. Thank y'all.
Hey.
Yeah.
Thank you. Have a good evening, everybody.